everybody, it's Miss Kristen and Rhett reporting in to give you another Kids Church video lesson. Say hi, Rhett. Hi. Exciting news about Rhett. Rhett started out as our coronavirus canine. He was going to keep us a little company while we were shut inside. We were doing the shelter a favor by taking a dog in, but we got attached and we have adopted him. So this is my new puppy and we renamed him Goose. So Goose will be helping us teach Sunday school from now on and probably forever. Isn't that right? Oh, yes, yes. Oh. Now, what we're going to talk about today is discipleship. What does it mean to be a disciple? What are disciples? Now, some of you have been in Kids Church where we've talked about disciples before. We've talked a lot about stories of Jesus and the disciples. We've talked a lot about what it means to be a disciple. But if you haven't been in Kids Church for those lessons, let's just start from the beginning. So now I'm going to give you a minute. If you know what a disciple is and a story about the disciples, turn to somebody you're with, or tell somebody after, or just say it out loud. I'll give you a minute. What is a disciple? And what kind of disciples are we talking about today? If you're somebody who hasn't learned these lessons, just take a guess. What is a disciple and who had disciples? Is there any stories about disciples you remember? Take a minute and think about. Okay, now that you've had a minute, we'll go over it. Jesus was a really important person. I mean, he still is a really important person, but back in the time where he was alive, he was a huge celebrity even, because everybody knew about him. Everybody knew he was the Son of God. He healed people. He had these amazing stories. He had all this wisdom, and he walked around to all these different places and towns, and he healed people and helped people. Now imagine being a celebrity today and not having any type of social media. Nobody could find pictures of you online. Nobody could hear news stories about you. Nobody could see your Instagram. He was only popular by word of mouth. So in order for everybody to know about you, you have to be pretty special. And he was. But he couldn't do it all by himself because he's one guy. And he had to roam all around and help people and share with people. So he had what was called disciples, which were faithful friends who followed him, who believed in what he was saying wholeheartedly. And they helped him show other people about God's love. So they were his faithful disciples. He had 12 of them. Now, I know some of you know some of the disciple names. So if you can think of any right now, I'll give you a minute. Try to name as many disciples as you can. There's 12, and just think about names that the disciples were. I'll give you a minute. Okay, now you've all had a minute to think of any disciple names that you might be able to remember. I bet Olivia remembered Philip, just a guess. So, if you didn't know any, totally fine, because you know what? At the end of the day, it's not always important to remember all their names, but rather what they did. Now, the 12 disciples were, and I'll give you all their names here, Philip, Andrew, Thomas, Matthew, Bartholomew, John, Peter, Simon, James, Matthias, and Judas. Now, I said Judas last. I saved the worst for last. Judas is probably the most important disciple to remember. He was the one who betrayed Jesus. Now, like we talked about, Jesus was becoming really popular all around. People were realizing that he was the Son of God, and they were all starting to believe in him. So the more people that were believing in Jesus meant the less people that were believing in the king. So the king did not want Jesus around. And now, you'll remember that too from the Christmas story when Jesus was born. That king also didn't want Jesus around. So it's kind of a theme that Jesus is always hiding from the king, because the king is nervous that people are going to start believing in Jesus and not him. So the king is looking for Jesus. He wants to kill Jesus. And Judas, for just a few pieces of silver, betrays Jesus and tells the guards of the king where Jesus is. So what does Jesus do? Does Jesus kill Judas? Does he battle Judas? Does he banish Judas? No. He holds a dinner. Classic Jesus move. He holds a dinner for all his disciples. This dinner is called, and we've talked about it before, but it's so important that it's worth mentioning so many times. What's wrong, baby? It was called the Last Supper. Now, Jesus gets all of his disciples together, and they all have, do you need to go? Goose is taking a break. Jesus invites all of the disciples over for a dinner, and they all come around a table. And Jesus has two things for dinner. Can anybody guess? I'll give you a minute to think about it. If you guessed bread and wine, you are right. Jesus had a big thing of bread and he had a big thing of wine, and he says that each thing represents something. What do you think the bread represents? Take a minute and think about it. And what do you think the wine represents? If you said that the bread represents the body and the wine represents the blood, then you're absolutely right. Jesus took the bread and he said, this bread represents my body. And he poured the wine and he said, this wine represents my blood. And he passed it out to everybody. And as they all ate and drank, he told them that one of them had betrayed him. And of course, Judas knows that it was him, but nobody else knows who it was. So everybody's like, oh, who could have been betraying Jesus? Has anybody ever played the game of Clue? Where you're all around each other and you're like, who did it? Who is the murderer? And you don't know. That was like that. The disciples were all looking around like, who could it be? Who betrayed Jesus? Did I betray him on accident? People had no idea, except for Judas. So Jesus basically told them all, I forgive you. I forgive you for betraying me, and I love you either way. And he gave them bread and he gave them wine. And remember, this is called the Last Supper, and it is one of the most famous moments in all of history. And so many of the greatest artists out there have painted or drawn this very moment and what they think it would have looked like. And they have so many renditions out there. Now, I'm going to post a few. They're going to come up on like a little slideshow in just a second, so you can see some of like the magnificent Last Suppers. The most famous one is by Leonardo da Vinci, and he was the first one to draw it, and it is in museums. It is a priceless painting, and it is one of the most famous paintings in the world, because that's how important this dinner was. So I urge you to go look at, after this, go look up the Last Supper and see all the different renditions, because even though the most famous one was Da Vinci, people do all sorts of renditions of the Last Supper. And that leads me to our activity, which this activity, I'm not going to do it for you. I'm going to show you just a picture of what I did. But you can paint the Last Supper. You could draw the Last Supper. You could make little clay or Play-Doh replicas of people and make the Last Supper as like a little claymation. Or what I'm going to do is I'm going to take little action figures I have from downstairs that I use to teach my summer camps, and I'm going to make a dinosaur Last Supper, and I'm going to take a picture of it and I'm going to show it to you. If you like how your Last Supper came out, I urge you to take a picture of it and send it to me. I'd love to see what you guys come up with. I'm going to do a few different versions, so you'll kind of see my renditions of the Last Supper, and it's kind of fun. Just have a little fun with it. And we will show that slideshow right now of the different Last Suppers there are. Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper. The Last Supper labeled. Other renditions. Now, what we're going to do for an activity that I'm actually going to lead, because it's hard to lead an activity like drawing the Last Supper, because you're either just going to watch me draw something on a piece of paper or watch me set up action figures, when you guys can kind of take your own creative license and do whatever you want for the Last Supper. We're actually going to use materials that I know you all probably have because we did it in the last activity. We're going to use our leftover tissue paper to make stained glass windows that'll be really pretty. So I'm about to show you that, and so look at that for the next video, and I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Now, what we'll do next time we talk, we'll talk about after Judas does betray Jesus, what happens? We're going to talk about the Easter story. And I know that I kind of just flew over an entire segment of disciples. Who are disciples? What did they do? And then Last Supper. But I urge you, since we can't get together, look up some stories or have your parents read you some stories about the disciples and Jesus and their many journeys. There's all sorts of different stories out there. Like we talked about, Jesus feeds the 5,000 in church. There's also the big catch. There's Jesus healing all sorts of sick or dead people. There's all sorts of stories where the disciples go on an adventure with Jesus. And so look into those and kind of see what you think about that. And be ready for the next video where I show you how to make stained glass